You're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Zach Bechtold and Matt Franks. We hope you enjoyed today's podcast and check us out online at beardedtheologians.com. All right, you're listening to the Bearded Theologians podcast, hosted by Matt Franks
and Zach Bechtold. And today we have a special guest with us. We have Sophia Agtarap, right?
Yeah.
Yes. She is the Director of Communications at Vanderbilt Divinity School, and she's also a deaconess in the United Methodist Church. Sophia, great to have you with us today.
It is a pleasure to join you all. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, certainly. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, who you are, where you come from, what you do, and, all that stuff.
Yeah, so I'm going to apologize in advance because our building is under renovation, so if you hear buzzing and jackhammering, it's happening downstairs. So I was consecrated in May as a deaconess in the United Methodist Church, and deaconesses and home missioners are this fairly new recognized order in the United Methodist Church. So deaconesses for women, home missioners for men. And we are a lay order of the United Methodist Church called to a lifetime ministry of love, justice, and service. And so you'll find deaconesses in placements that are in school settings, right, educational settings, or you might find a deaconess or home missioner who's an EMT or a teacher, or like myself, a communications person. So we sort of span the gamut of vocations, but all with this sort of grounding and call to serve in ministries of love, justice, and service. And I feel like it's not a very well-known order in the United Methodist Church. I think when we think about, vocations and ministry, and especially sort of these like formalized tracks to ministry, we always tend to go toward being an ordained elder or deacon. And for those who don't feel that call, but still feel the call to some formally recognized ministry and a way to serve the United Methodist Church, this is a great order to be a part of, or to discern to be a part of. And here's the reason why, is you get theological training in our United Methodist seminaries, and they pay for it all.
Nice.
So you are a seminary theologically trained layperson who really feels a strong call to ministries of love, justice, and service in the world. And what that looks like takes lots of different forms, but we are also part of that world diaconate. So it's one of those like best kept secrets of the United Methodist Church, a good secret. But I would love to see more millennials and people of color explore whether or not this would be a good fit for them.
Yeah, I've known you for a while, and when I saw you kind of going through that process, I thought it was an interesting process. I didn't really know anything about, and it was something that I wanted to bring you on the show so that you could talk about it and talk about your setting and talk about what you do, but then also just kind of help people connect if that's something they feel calling to do. Where can they go to find that information? Because if someone were to come to me now, granted I would know because I've known you and you've kind of put it out there and I know where to go, but we'll have other pastors that listen to this podcast that might know of some people in their congregations that may have that exact same kind of call or feeling, and they don't know where to send them. Where can we direct them to if they've got that pull on their heart?
Yeah. So if you Google it, no, just type in, that's why I said everything, Google it. Just type in deaconess and UMW, or United Methodist Women, and we're actually sort of under the United Methodist Women as the organization that we are consecrated through, or that sort of holds all of that stuff together. And so if you just Google deaconess and United Methodist Women, or I guess you could type in dhmumc.org. I'm going to say it's not a great website, so don't let that be a reflection of whether or not you continue interest. They're working on it. But they offer these free discernment events, both online and in person. And so that's, I think, a great first step. Or talk to a deaconess or home missioner like myself, or maybe someone you know through church or some other way that can sort of help answer some questions. But the discernment events are a really great opportunity to begin that exploration process. And they hold them in different parts of the country and online for those that aren't able to get away for like a weekend.
Right. I love this idea of a deaconess being ordained in this as a layperson. I mean, Matt and I talked to so many people in our churches and just around of, gosh, I want to do ministry, but pastoral ministry is not my call. You know, even being a deacon, an ordained deacon in the United Methodist Church, still not my call. I have this desire to be a layperson, but I have this call to love justice or service. You know, maybe not in those words.
Yeah. Yeah.
But
yeah.
that's the idea, right?
Right.
I think too often. Oh, go ahead.
Oh.
Well, and I think like I use my wife's experience as kind of a jumping off point. In her undergrad, she was working on a theology degree, but didn't want to go to seminary because at that point, the only option she had ever been told about was pastoral ministry. Yeah. But she loved theology. She loved digging into that, but didn't want to go and be a pastor, and frankly still doesn't. You know, but that idea of being a deaconess would fit her wheelhouse and still allow her to do the things that she's doing and be in ministry, but have that training, have that kind of foot in the door, but still be called where she is feeling called.
Yeah. And I think, you know, that's one of the things that I've lamented a little bit. You know, I'm a lifelong United Methodist. My dad is a retired United Methodist clergy. My sister and brother-in-law are all clergy. And so, but one thing I've lamented as someone who cares deeply about many things and thinks that a theological education is really important, an important lens through which to view the world, there weren't a lot of options, like, you know, to say that I want to be a lay person and there are certain things that I feel called to do sort of vocationally, but then for the church not really to recognize that as sort of this valid like pathway to ministry for me is lamentable. And I continue to, you know, to hope that our church would see lay ministry as important as, you know, parish ministry. But I think, you know, working in a divinity school, I think we're seeing this across the board in the United States, at least, this shift from people who are going to seminary or getting divinity, you know, going to divinity school, wanting to go and get their MDiv to then serve a congregation or a parish. And we're seeing that shift because more people they might be interested in an MTS or an MDiv, but not necessarily to serve a congregation, but to have that training and then go and be, you know, an executive director of a nonprofit, to be a community activist or organizer. And so I think we're continuing to see the value of a theological education, but played out in different ways. And so this deaconess home missioner order, I think, is a really important way for the church to say, we see you and we value your gifts, and it doesn't all have to look like being ordained an elder or a deacon in the United Methodist Church.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I love that. I love that option that as United Methodist Church, we have some of those, right? Mm-hmm. And hopefully have a lot of options into where we're feeling called from, you know, all aspects of life, which I think is really, really cool. And I think we miss out the opportunity to promote that and to help our church live into that. Because we don't always hear about these things until it's, you know, maybe not too late, but 10 years down the road and you go, oh crap, man, if I would have heard that 10 years ago, I would have jumped headfirst into it, you know?
Yeah, and not have been like $100,000 in debt from seminary and
Yep.
Yeah. Have options.
Yeah. Or, you know, and it may be someone, and I've been thinking about this with a couple of people, that they may have that call, but maybe it's not the parish ministry, and that like they don't know what the other options are that are out there. They just assume it's either parish ministry or lay speaking school, and that's it. And have maybe this other option out there for people to see and people to say, hey, I can do what I feel God calling me to do and be theologically trained. And, you know, I was thinking about this for my wife, and, you know, granted, she read probably 95% of my theology papers, but that doesn't mean she has an education. She just does what I think, or what I had read. But, you know, I know that she's wrestled with that and
Mhm.
would love to, that I'm hopefully this might be something that she might be interested in, because she definitely has that call and I think she would love to have that training. And I think that's what she's missing, is would love not having that training side, because a lot of times we've been thrusted in a situation where she has to be that trainer, because there's not very much training, because she doesn't want to get it from me. And well, we don't work well together. We definitely share the covenant of marriage well together, but when it comes to working in the church, it just doesn't work. By the way, she's now my children's director, so this is going to be fun. But she feels like, her call is definitely in serving in our communities and helping kids make sure that they can read, and she does a great job of that. And I think maybe this might be something for her, and I actually just sent her the website and said, hey, you should look at this.
Very good.
Because I've been trying to figure out how to have that, just that direction for people like her, because it's not just been her that I've had that conversation with. I've had other people in my congregations that I've served, and I think of 2 or 3 right now in the congregation I'm serving right now, that this would be great for them, because they would get some of the training that they feel like they need. They feel like God is calling on them, and then they can figure out their way to serve however they need to, and what their setting may be. It's huge. And so I thank you for you sharing this. It's a good deal.
It really is. Okay. Yeah, it really is. And again, back to this sort of education piece, and to think that you're taking graduate level courses through our United Methodist seminaries that they have relationships with. And like, for example, the first course you take is on the theology of mission. And the location that I took it at was the St. Paul campus in Oklahoma, which is when we weren't able to connect last year. But so you're there for, like Monday through Friday, taking these courses, but you're also building community. And I think it's just a really neat way to be a part of a church that I think for many people, they didn't feel that they were part of if they weren't able to sort of go that ordination route. And so, yeah, it's a great thing to explore, to recommend. Go to the discernment events and kind of see if God is nudging you in that direction.
Yeah. So in your day job, how do you find yourself living into love, justice, and service, this order that you've been called to?
Yeah. So I think for a lot of people, doing communications work does not seem like it would fit.
Right.
And I think for a lot of folks, like, just understanding what it is that a communications director or person might do, probably calls to mind like websites and like print materials and things like that, which are all part of my job. But when I think about this diverse, ecumenical, progressive divinity school located very much in the South, and I think about our students who are both going to serve in big and small churches, in various denominations, but who are also artists and musicians and activists and scholars and all of these things. I feel like part of what I get to do, which is really a joy, is to help tell the stories of what this community is about and the ways that they have been formed through their experiences here, but also the ways that they're living out their call, whether their call is to be an ordained person or not, their call to serve God and neighbor in the world. And so in terms of being called to a ministry of love, justice, and service, I feel that storytelling is holy work. And when I think about the stories that aren't being told, or people's stories or voices that don't get to be lifted, for me, it's a justice issue. It's a hospitality issue. And so to be able to be connected to folks in that way, and to be able to be a vehicle through which their stories and truths and realities are shared, to me is really exciting. And it really is a privilege to get to do that work, and to also be a connector of sorts, right? Because sometimes what happens in a particular organization or community doesn't always get shared with those in the surrounding areas or even beyond the geographic area. And so to be able to help be a connector in that way for me is also really exciting. Yeah.
Well, you do such a good job of it. I mean, like I said, I've known you for a while, and you really do a good job of helping tell that story, whether, depending on how, whatever medium you're using. You also cook on the side, right? Is that, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, so I'm trying to think of a starting point. So I think when people sort of see my life, they're like, oh, she like does way too many things, or those are really random things that are not connected. But if I were to describe myself, I would say I would call myself an evangelist in the best possible sense, right? I love to share and I love to bring people together around different things. And so communication and storytelling lets me do that in different ways. But so does like gathering people around food. And so when I worked for United Methodist Communications as their Minister of Online Engagement for the Rethink Church team. And then after doing that for a few years, which is what brought me to Nashville, I left that job and asked myself, like, if I could do something for a year or two, like, what would that look like? And so I continued to freelance with different organizations and still did the communication stuff. But in addition to that, I was like, I really love cooking, but I also love the idea of bringing people together around food for conversation, to exchange culture, like all those things. And so I got a spot at the Nashville Farmers Market in their commercial kitchen, and I set up there like every Friday for that summer, and then continued for the next like year and a half to 2 years on and off doing that. And for me, like this idea of like sharing food, exchanging culture is very much sort of a question or an issue of around like hospitality. And so what are ways that cooking and sharing food and meals are sort of this like vehicle for exchange, for welcome, for conversation. And so I do that every now and then. I'm actually having an event next Friday evening. But for me, food has always just been this vehicle through which we share and exchange things, ideas, stories. And so that continues to be this thing that I come back to is how do we continue to use food also as like resistance. So when we think about the groups of people who are being isolated or targeted by this current administration, for example, I mean, not to get political, but I think about like food as resistance as well. You know, what are ways that whether or not a particular administration continues to put bans or prohibit certain groups of people from entering the country, what are ways that food can still be this way that culture and friendship and relationships can be experienced and exchanged?
Right. Well, that goes when I hear you talk about kind of that theology of food, right, and community. That's what Jesus did. Jesus went around. He was a storyteller. He told the gospel, right? He brought this good news. He brought this story to these communities, and so often he did it around food, and gathered people together around the table. And there's something so genuine about that and really relaxing. I mean, you can gather a group of people who have known each other their entire lives around the table, or you can gather a complete group of strangers around that same table and have deep, life-giving conversations. And it's going to take some time to get to that place within that conversation, but there's something about food and a table that does that kind of brings down some walls, brings down some barriers. Yeah. And I mean, you immediately have some common ground around food, you know, and that opens up the conversation for anything.
Yeah. And that's something that I think we don't always get on social media, right? Because we don't have some common something that we're exchanging or sharing. And I think you know, I wonder, like, lots of things could be addressed, maybe not solved, but like we could start to pick at
Mhm.
a lot of things if we could sit down and break bread together.
Right.
Yeah, in that way.
Well, there's also
Yeah.
a sense of vulnerability when you come and eat at the table, because you're always like, man, I really want to eat a whole bunch of that, but I don't want to look like a pig, so I'll
Yeah.
eat a little bit. I mean, and so like, I mean, I think of the times like I've been around friends and stuff. And it's like I've had more fun being around the table no matter what we're doing. And even when there are people that I disagree with, I would much rather sit down with them at a table and share a meal together, so we can figure out some of our commonalities. That even though we know that there's some things that we aren't necessarily 100% agreeing on, that hey, we can still have this even though we still disagree. And you know Thanksgiving always comes to mind. It's always an internal struggle. Like, that you're going into this, that there's going to be a conversation at the Thanksgiving table. You're just like, how am I going to respond? Am I
Mhm.
going and so I think that table does break down some of those barriers that is there. And I think if people had more passion about doing that and coming to a table with someone that they disagree with, I think they'd see some commonalities
Well,
between.
right. One of the things that I see, so I live in a very small community. It's less than 2,000 people. Um, and we have 3 restaurants in town. And one of our restaurants, they have a community table. And it fascinates me to go in there and watch people who know each other for the most part. A group of 2 or 3 come and sit at this table, and then a single person, and a whole 12 or 15 people. It's a big table, and watching folks come down in the noon hour rush to eat, and then build this community around this table, come and go as they need to come and go, but simply just come and eat. And it's fascinating to watch people approach that table and then go sit somewhere else, and then people
Yeah.
intentionally go sit at that table,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
It's
I think
fascinating.
it does. I think it
And I
does.
and I think we should do more of that, as having those community tables.
You know, I agree, and I think it goes back to that idea of vulnerability, and um, I think we get so isolated and insular sometimes, and to take something as simple, as seemingly simple as sharing a table with a stranger. Like, who knows what conversations could come from that? And I think lots of really interesting ones have, if we take sort of a moment to like let our guard down, and see what experience we might have there.
It's the same thing that happens in bars when people go and sit around the bar itself. It's
Yeah.
very community oriented, right? Whether you're having a conversation with the bartender, or the person beside you or 2 or 3 seats down, it's that same barrier that's broken down, and this vulnerability to be like, well, I'm new here, or this is just a place I am, and these are people, and I'm going to sit. And you just watch people have these conversations, whether they know each other or not. And there's something that you're right, there's a vulnerability that goes along with that, and we have to allow ourselves to do that. And too often, I don't know, in the church, if we do, or just as people, we have a hard time doing that. We don't like being vulnerable in most places.
Yeah.
But
Well, and
put
I
some
think,
food in front of
well, and that's what's kind of
you, or a
hard.
drink or whatever, and something seems to happen there.
Well, I think that's what's kind of hard with our digital age that we live in, is that they're like, this is about as close as we can get in a sense of having a shared, we could all sit down with a meal, like we could all get like a meal and sit here and eat and have that conversation virtually. But I think there is something sacred and holy about when you're physically present with each other. And I think of like all the friendships that, like, man, I would love to go to an event where I know that so and so is going to be there, so we can go have dinner or go have group drinks or whatever like that. Like I long for those more than I care about sometimes the content of the thing I'm going to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think we have to strive to push to find ways to do that in some of our communities, because Sophia, you live in Nashville, where some of that stuff is kind of not, I mean, that can happen. Zach lives in a small rural community where he would have to create it in a different way, and that would have to look a little bit differently. And I was thinking, here in Tahquah, what are some ways that I could do that would be kind of cool and unique and different, that would be still intentional, and hey, we're gathering for a meal. And so I think it's a great thing to do, and we can all think about ways that we can affect our communities by doing that. And so, so Sophia, we thank you for your time. Thank you for sharing about the Deaconess program. I'm hoping that more people look at that. We'll add a link to that to our website so that way people can go and look at it. And the website could use some work, but it does have some general information.
Right.
But I know that it will eventually have all the information that you need to be able to, if that's something you feel calling on your heart, or if you're a pastor and you've got some people in your community that this would be good for them, please feel free to share that information, because I think it's vital for the strengthening of our connection. And so go on our website, beardtheologians.com. We've got some good things up there on the website, good blogs and good posts. So we thank you for your time, Sophia. And so for the Bearded Theologians, I'm Matt Franks.
I'm Zach Bechtold. Thanks for checking us out.
We hope you've enjoyed the conversations that we've had today on the Bearded Theologians Beardcast, and we'd encourage you to continue those conversations online at beardedtheologians.com or on our Facebook page. We also hope that you pick up a couple of coffee mugs to satisfy your coffee mug collection. Have a good day.